The mountain man's calloused hand hovered over his cards, while Josephine Harper stood frozen beside the whiskey-stained poker table, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized her husband had just wagered her freedom on a pair of sevens. St. Elmo, Colorado sat nestled in the Rocky Mountains like a forgotten prayer, its wooden buildings weathered by harsh winters and the dreams of men who came searching for silver in 1878. The saloon reeked of tobacco smoke, spilled liquor, and desperation. Josephine could taste the metallic tang of fear on her tongue as she watched Thomas Harper, the man she had married only 6 months prior in Missouri, lay down his pathetic hand with shaking fingers. She had thought him a respectable merchant when they wed. She had been 22 years old and naive, believing his promises of a prosperous life out west. Instead, she discovered a gambling addict who had squandered every cent they owned and then some. "Raid them and weep, Harper," said Dutch McCready, a grizzled mine owner with tobacco-stained teeth and eyes like a rattlesnake. He spread his cards across the table with deliberate slowness. 3 queens stared up at them like judges pronouncing sentence. "Looks like the lady is mine now." Josephine's stomach turned violently. Around the table sat 4 other men who had witnessed this abomination, their faces ranging from uncomfortable to amused. The bartender had stopped wiping glasses. The piano player's fingers had stilled on the keys. Everyone in the Colorado Star Saloon understood what had just transpired, and no one moved to stop it. "Thomas," Josephine whispered, her voice breaking, "tell me you did not just do what I think you did." Her husband would not meet her eyes. His face had gone the color of old parchment, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air that leaked through the saloon's gaps. "I thought I had it this time, Josie. I was so sure. You bet me. You bet your wife like I was a horse or a piece of furniture." The words came out flat, drained of emotion because her mind could not quite grasp the reality of her situation. Dutch McCready pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He was a thick-set man in his 50s, his breath perpetually sour with whiskey. "A bet is a bet. Your husband put you up as collateral and I won fair and square. You belong to me now, sweetheart." "A woman cannot be owned," Josephine said, finding her voice, letting anger burn through the shock. "This is 1878, not the Dark Ages. I am not property." "Tell that to your husband who just signed a paper saying otherwise," Dutch replied, pulling a crumpled document from his vest pocket. "All legal-like. You witnessed it yourself, didn't you, boys?" The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a young ranch hand named Billy, looked away, but they nodded. They had witnessed Thomas Harper sign away his wife's freedom in lieu of the $500 he owed Dutch McCready. Josephine felt the walls closing in. She had no money of her own, no family in Colorado, no means of leaving this God-forsaken town. Thomas had isolated her completely, and now he had sold her to pay his debts. "I will not go with you," she said, lifting her chin even as her hands trembled. Dutch McCready's expression hardened. "You will, or your husband will find himself at the bottom of a mine shaft, still breathing when he goes down, if you catch my meaning." Thomas made a small, whimpering sound. Josephine stared at the man she had married, seeing him clearly for the first time. A coward. A fool. A wretch who valued his own skin more than her dignity or safety. Whatever affection she had held for him withered and died in that moment. "You are pathetic," she told him quietly. Then she turned to Dutch McCready, her spine straight despite the terror coursing through her veins. "If I go with you tonight, you will leave him alive." "That is the deal," Dutch said, grinning to reveal those stained teeth. Josephine nodded once. She would go. But she would find a way out of this nightmare, even if she had to walk through hell to do it. Dutch reached for her arm, but before his fingers could close around her wrist, the saloon doors burst open with such force that one hinge tore free from the doorframe. A gust of cold mountain air swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of pine and snow. And then he was there. Yates Forrester stood in the doorway like something carved from the mountains themselves. He was well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders so broad they nearly filled the frame. His hair was dark and fell past his collar, windswept and wild. He wore buckskin pants and a heavy coat made of bear fur that emphasized the powerful build beneath. His arms were thick with muscle, his chest like a barrel, his hands large enough to crush a man's skull. A full beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were visible pale blue, sharp as winter sky, and fixed on the scene before him with an intensity that made Josephine's breath catch. He had been gone from St. Elmo for 3 months, up in the higher elevations, trapping and hunting. Yates was known throughout these mountains as a man who kept to himself, who needed no one, who could survive in conditions that would kill other men. He traded his furs and pelts in town a few times a year, and then vanished back into the wilderness. Josephine had seen him only once before, months ago when she first arrived in St. Elmo. He had been buying supplies at the general store, and she had been struck by the sheer size of him, the way others gave him a wide berth not from fear but from respect. Now those ice-blue eyes swept the saloon, taking in every detail in seconds. They landed on Josephine, moved to Dutch McCready's hand still reaching for her, then dropped to the cards on the table. "What is happening here?" His voice was deep, resonant, the kind that carried across canyons. Dutch McCready's grin faded slightly. Even he was not fool enough to dismiss Yates Forrester. "Private game, Forrester. No concern of yours." Yates stepped fully into the saloon, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He moved with the confidence of a predator, unhurried but purposeful. "Look to me like you were about to lay hands on a woman who did not want to be touched. That makes it my concern." "The woman is mine," Dutch said, puffing up his chest. "Won her fair and square from her husband. Got the paper to prove it." Yates's gaze shifted to Thomas Harper, and the disgust in his expression was so profound that Thomas actually recoiled. Then those pale eyes found Josephine again, and something in them softened almost imperceptibly. "That true?" he asked her directly. "He wagered you in a card game." Josephine's throat was tight, but she managed to speak. "Yes, my husband owes Dutch McCready $500. He put me up as collateral when he ran out of money." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Yates stood utterly still for a long moment, and Josephine could see him thinking, calculating. Then he moved to the poker table and pulled out a chair. "Sit down, McCready," he said quietly. Dutch frowned. "What? You heard me. Sit down. We are going to play a hand." "I already won. Sit down." There was no threat in Yates's voice, no bluster, just absolute certainty that his command would be obeyed. Dutch McCready sat down. Yates gathered the cards from the table, including Thomas's pitiful sevens and Dutch's queens. He moved with practiced ease, his large hands surprisingly dexterous as he shuffled the deck. "Here is the proposition," he said, his eyes locked on Dutch. "We play one hand, 5-card draw. If you win, I will pay you the $500 your husband owes you and the woman goes free. If I win, she goes free and you tear up that paper." "And if I refuse?" Dutch asked. "Then I will break every bone in your hand and you will never hold cards again, or a gun, or your own piss-pot." The threat was delivered in the same quiet, steady tone. Somehow that made it more terrifying. No one in the saloon doubted that Yates Forrester could and would do exactly what he said. Dutch licked his lips. "What do you care about Harper's wife?" "I do not like seeing women treated as property," Yates replied simply. Are we playing or do I start with your fingers? We are playing, Dutch said quickly. He glanced around the table at the other men. Same witnesses as before. This is legal. Yates dealt the cards with swift efficiency. Josephine watched, hardly daring to breathe. This stranger was risking $500 for her. $500 was a fortune, enough to keep a family fed and housed for a year or more. She did not understand why he would do such a thing, but desperation made her cling to this unexpected lifeline. Both men looked at their cards. Dutch's expression was unreadable. Yates showed nothing. How many? Yates asked. 2, Dutch said, discarding. Yates dealt him 2 cards, then looked at his own hand. Dealer takes 1. He discarded a single card and dealt himself another. The tension in the saloon was suffocating. Even the fire in the pot-bellied stove seemed to burn quieter, as if holding its breath. Show, Yates said. Dutch laid down his hand with a triumphant smirk. Straight, 7 through Jack. It was a solid hand. Josephine felt her heart sink. She looked at Yates, praying to a god she was no longer sure existed that he had something better. The mountain man laid down his cards one at a time. 10 of spades, Jack of spades, Queen of spades, King of spades, and finally the Ace of spades. Royal flush, Yates said calmly. The saloon erupted. Men shouted in disbelief. Billy the ranch hand slapped the table so hard the glasses jumped. Dutch McCready's face went through several colors before settling on a mottled purple. That is impossible, Dutch sputtered. The odds do not matter. That is the hand. You saw it dealt fair. Yates extended his palm. The paper. Dutch looked like he might argue, but one glance at Yates's implacable expression convinced him otherwise. With shaking hands, he pulled the document from his vest and placed it in the mountain man's palm. Yates took the paper, glanced at it just long enough to confirm what it was, and then held it over the nearest lamp. The paper caught fire immediately, curling and blackening as flames consumed it. He held it until there was nothing left but ash, which he let drift to the floor. Then he gathered all the cards from the table, including those still in the deck, and walked to the pot-bellied stove. He opened the iron door and threw the entire deck inside. The cards caught instantly, 52 pieces of pasteboard and ink becoming flame and smoke. Game is over, Yates announced to the room. And before anyone gets ideas about another deck and another wager, hear me clear. This woman is under my protection now. Anyone who touches her, threatens her, or so much as looks at her wrong will answer to me personally. That includes you, Harper. Thomas Harper had shrunk into his chair, trying to become invisible. He nodded frantically. Yates turned to Josephine. Up close, he was even more imposing. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and what she saw there was not what she expected. Beneath the hardness, there was kindness. Beneath the danger, there was decency. You have belongings here, he asked her, at the boarding house. 1 trunk. Get it, you are leaving St. Elmo. To go where? The question came out smaller than she intended. My cabin, up in the high country. It is remote, but it is safe. You can stay there until we figure out what comes next. You are taking me to your home. Josephine felt dizzy. Everything was happening so fast. An hour ago she had been married, miserable but stable. Now she was being rescued by a stranger and offered refuge in the wilderness. Unless you would rather stay here with these fine gentlemen, Yates said, and there might have been the faintest hint of dry humor in his tone. No, Josephine said quickly. No, I will come with you, thank you. I do not know how to thank you. Thank me by surviving the trip. The trail to my cabin is not easy, especially this time of year. He glanced at her dress, a simple calico thing that was entirely inadequate for mountain winter. We will need to get you proper clothes too. Come on. He started for the door and Josephine followed, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. Behind her, she heard Thomas call out weakly, "Josie." Wait, she did not turn around, did not acknowledge him. Whatever had existed between them was as dead as the ashes of that contract. Outside, the November night was crystalline and cold. Stars blazed overhead in impossible numbers. St. Elmo was quiet except for the distant sound of someone playing a fiddle. Yates led her down the main street toward the boarding house, his long strides forcing her to hurry to keep pace. "I will need to get my things too," she said. "Clothes, some personal items." "We will get what you need," he assured her. "But we leave at first light. The weather is turning and I want to be home before the serious snow comes." Home. The word sounded foreign applied to a place she had never seen, with a man she did not know. Yet somehow it felt less frightening than staying in St. Elmo under the hungry eyes of Dutch Macready and other men like him. They reached the boarding house, a narrow two-story structure with peeling paint. Mrs. Calloway, the landlady, was in the front room when they entered. Her eyes went wide at the sight of Yates Forrester in her hallway, this giant of a man tracking mountain dirt across her clean floors. "Mr. Forrester," she said nervously. "What can I do for you?" "Mrs. Harper is checking out," Yates said. "She will need help packing her trunk." Mrs. Calloway looked between them, clearly sensing a story but wise enough not to ask questions. "Of course. I will help you, dear." 20 minutes later, Josephine's meager possessions were packed. She owned 2 other dresses, some undergarments, a few books, a small music box her mother had given her, and a daguerreotype of her parents taken before they died of fever. It all fit in one battered trunk that Yates lifted as easily as if it were empty. "Do I owe you anything?" Josephine asked Mrs. Calloway. The landlady shook her head. "Your husband paid through the week when you took the room. We are square." There was pity in her eyes. She had heard then. Word traveled fast in a town this small. Josephine felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she lifted her chin and thanked the woman politely. Yates carried her trunk out into the street. "There is a store that stays open late for miners coming off shift. Owner is a friend. We will get you outfitted properly." The general store was indeed still open, lamplight spilling from its windows. The proprietor, a weathered man named Sam, greeted Yates with genuine warmth. "Yates, you old bear, wondered when you would be back down. Need supplies, Sam. And winter clothes for the lady. Boots, wool dresses, a good coat, gloves, hat, everything she needs to survive the high country." Sam's eyebrows rose, but like Mrs. Calloway, he was smart enough not to pry. "I will see what I have." For the next hour, Josephine found herself being outfitted like an expedition. Sam produced wool dresses in dark colors, flannel undergarments, thick stockings, sturdy leather boots lined with fur, a heavy coat made of sheepskin, mittens, a knit cap, even snowshoes. "It cannot all be necessary," Josephine protested as the pile grew. "It is all necessary," Yates corrected. "Where we are going, the snow can get 6 feet deep. Temperature drops so low you can hear trees exploding from the cold. You need proper gear or you will not last a week." The matter-of-fact way he said it chilled her more than any threat. This was not hyperbole. This was reality in the high Rockies. When everything was gathered, Sam tallied up the cost. "Comes to about $40, Yates." Yates pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat and counted out gold coins without hesitation. Josephine felt guilt twist in her stomach. First the $500. He had been willing to pay Dutch Macready. Now 40 more for her clothes. She was costing this stranger a fortune. "I will repay you," she said quietly. "Somehow, I promise." Yates looked at her, and for the first time she saw something almost like amusement in his eyes. "Let us worry about keeping you alive first. We can discuss debts later." They left the store loaded with packages. Yates took her back to the boarding house where he arranged for her to have a room for one more night. "Sleep while you can," he advised. "We leave before dawn. It is a hard ride to the cabin." "Where will you be?" Josephine asked. "I have a room above the livery." "I will be getting the horses and supplies ready." He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "You are safe now, Mrs. Harper. Whatever else happens, you are safe. I give you my word." Something in the way he said it made her believe him. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. Yates tipped his head to her and then strode off into the darkness, disappearing like a ghost despite his size. Josephine climbed the stairs to her room in a daze. She sat on the narrow bed, still wearing her thin calico dress, and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning, she had woken up as the wife of Thomas Harper, trapped in a miserable marriage but following the path society expected of her. Tonight she was free of that marriage and all but legal paperwork, under the protection of a mountain man she did not know, preparing to vanish into the wilderness. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something that might have been hope. Dawn came cold and clear. Josephine dressed in her new wool clothes, marveling at how much warmer they were than her cotton dress. The boots fit well, sturdy and practical. She tied her dark hair back with a ribbon and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked different, stronger somehow. Yates was waiting outside with 2 horses when she came down. One was a massive bay gelding that suited his size. The other was a smaller mare, gray as smoke with intelligent eyes. "This is Dove," Yates said, stroking the mare's neck. "She is sure-footed and calm. She will take care of you on the trail." Josephine approached the horse carefully. She had ridden some as a girl, but never in terrain like this. Dove nuzzled her hand gently, and she felt an instant kinship with the animal. "Your trunk is packed on the mule," Yates continued, gesturing to where a sturdy mule stood placidly, loaded with supplies. "We have food for 2 weeks, feed for the animals, and everything else we need. The trip should take 3 days if the weather holds." 3 days in the mountains with this stranger. Alone. Josephine felt a flutter of nerves but pushed it down. She had made her choice. Forward was the only direction that made sense now. Yates helped her mount Dove, his hands careful and respectful. Then he swung up onto his own horse with an ease that spoke of thousands of hours in the saddle. He looked at her one more time. "Last chance to change your mind." "I am not changing my mind," Josephine said firmly. He nodded, turned his horse, and led the way out of St. Elmo as the sun began to paint the mountain peaks gold and pink. The trail climbed steadily from the moment they left town. Josephine quickly understood what Yates had meant about the terrain being difficult. The path was narrow, winding between towering pines and aspens that had already lost their leaves. To one side rose the mountain, ancient and indifferent. To the other fell sheer drops that made her stomach clench if she looked too long. Dove picked her way carefully, and Josephine learned to trust the mare's instincts. Yates rode ahead but constantly checked back, making sure she was managing. They did not talk much. The mountain demanded concentration, and besides, Josephine was too busy taking in the raw beauty around her. She had thought St. Elmo was remote, but this was something else entirely. This was wilderness in its purest form, untouched and untamed. They stopped at midday beside a stream so clear she could see every pebble on its bottom. Yates built a small fire with practiced efficiency and made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. He produced hardtack and dried meat from his saddlebags. "Not fancy, but it keeps you going," he said, handing her a tin cup of coffee. Josephine sipped it and nearly coughed. It was bitter and powerful, but the warmth was welcome. "Thank you for everything. I still do not understand why you helped me." Yates was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. My mother was sold to pay my father's debts when I was 10 years old. Different circumstances, different place, but the same thing. A woman treated as property. I was too young to stop it then. Could not do anything but watch her cry as they took her away. He lifted his eyes to meet hers. I am not too young anymore. The pain in those words was ancient and deep. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. What happened to her? Do not know, never saw her again. He took a drink of his coffee. Maybe she survived, maybe she found some happiness, I like to think so. But I learned something that day. Learned that when you have the power to help someone, you do it. Otherwise, what is the point of being strong? Josephine understood then. This was not charity. This was atonement. And perhaps in helping her, Yates Forrester was also healing some part of that 10-year-old boy who had been powerless to save his mother. She would be proud of the man you became, Josephine said softly. Yates glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his expression. Then he stood and kicked dirt over the fire. We should keep moving. Want to make it to the first shelter before dark. They rode through the afternoon, climbing higher. The air grew thinner, colder. Josephine's lungs burned with the effort of breathing, but she did not complain. She had asked for this, chosen it even. She would not falter now. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they emerged into a clearing where a small log structure stood. It was barely more than a lean-to, 3 walls and a roof. Built this a few years back as a waypoint, Yates explained, dismounting. Give shelter when the weather turns fast. He helped Josephine down from Dove, and she realized with some surprise that her legs were trembling from the long ride. Yates noticed too, his brow furrowing slightly. Sit, he ordered gently. I will take care of the animals and get a fire going. Too tired to argue, Josephine sat on a log near the lean-to and watched as Yates worked. He moved with remarkable efficiency, unsaddling the horses, rubbing them down, making sure they had water and grain. Then he built a fire in the stone ring outside the lean-to, the flames catching quickly under his expert hands. Within an hour, he had created something resembling comfort in the middle of the wilderness. He cooked a simple meal of beans and salt pork in a cast iron pot. It was plain food, but Josephine was hungry enough that it tasted wonderful. They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them and stars beginning to emerge overhead. You did well today, Yates said eventually. Most people from town could not handle that ride on their first day. I am more tired than I have ever been in my life, Josephine admitted, but I am glad to be here, glad to be away from St. Elmo. What will you do? Yates asked. After, I mean, when winter ends and the passes open again. It was a fair question, one Josephine had been avoiding thinking about. I do not know. I suppose I am still married to Thomas legally, though I will never go back to him. Could get a divorce, Yates suggested. Judge comes through the territory every few months. Abandonment and gambling debts would be grounds enough. And then what? I have no skills, no money. I was raised to be a wife, not to support myself. You are smart, Yates said with certainty. You can learn, and you are stronger than you think. You proved that today. His faith in her was both touching and bewildering. This man knew nothing about her, yet he seemed to believe she was capable of anything. Why do you live up here? Josephine asked, wanting to turn the focus away from herself. Alone in the mountains, it must be a hard life. It is hard, Yates agreed, but it is honest, no lies, no pretending. Just you and the mountain does not care who you are or where you come from. It treats everyone the same, fair in its own way. Do you not get lonely? He considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But I have spent time in towns too, and you can be just as lonely surrounded by people. More so, maybe, because you are expected to pretend everything is fine. Josephine understood that more than she wanted to admit. She had been desperately lonely in her marriage, trapped in a small room with a man who saw her as decoration at best, currency at worst. "I think I might understand that," she said quietly. Yates looked at her across the fire, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Two people who had learned that solitude was sometimes safer than company. "You should sleep," he said finally. "There are bedrolls in the lean-to. I will keep watch. All night. I do not need much sleep. And there are animals up here, bears, mountain lions. Better to have someone alert." The thought of predators lurking in the darkness was unsettling, but Josephine trusted that Yates would keep her safe. She gathered one of the bedrolls and made a nest for herself in the lean-to. The ground was hard, but she was so exhausted it barely mattered. Through the open side of the structure, she could see Yates sitting by the fire, his profile sharp against the flames. She fell asleep watching him, feeling safer than she had in months. The second day dawned misty and cold. Josephine woke to find Yates already up, coffee brewing and the horses ready. Her body ached in places she did not know could ache, but she forced herself up and moving. "Drink this," Yates said, handing her coffee, "and eat. Today is harder than yesterday." He was not exaggerating. The trail grew steeper, narrower. Several times they had to dismount and lead the horses around fallen trees or across streams swollen with snowmelt. Josephine's new boots kept her feet dry, but the effort of climbing left her gasping. Yates never rushed her. When she needed to stop and catch her breath, he stopped. When she stumbled on loose rocks, his hand was there to steady her. He did not make her feel weak or burdensome. He simply helped, as naturally as breathing. Around midday, the sky began to darken. Yates looked up, his expression growing concerned. "Snow is coming," he said. "We need to find shelter fast." Within an hour, the first flakes began to fall. They were small at first, almost delicate, but they multiplied rapidly, the wind picking up and driving the snow horizontal. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. "Stay close," Yates shouted over the wind. "Follow my horse." Josephine clung to Dove's reins, her face stinging from the cold and wind. Terror crept up her spine. She could barely see Yates ahead of her, just a dark shape in the swirling white. This was what he had warned her about. The mountains could kill you in minutes if you were not prepared. But Yates knew these trails like he knew his own hands. Even in the whiteout, he navigated with confidence, leading them steadily forward. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, he pulled up in front of a rocky overhang. "Here," he said, dismounting. "Get under the rock." Josephine slid off Dove and stumbled toward the shelter. The overhang created a natural cave about 10 feet deep, protected from the worst of the wind. Yates brought the horses and mule in as far as he could, then worked quickly to unload supplies. The storm raged outside their little sanctuary. Snow piled up rapidly, the wind howling like a living thing. Yates built a small fire near the back of the cave where the smoke would be drawn out by the wind. The heat was minimal, but it was better than nothing. "We will be here until this passes," he said, settling beside her. "Could be a few hours, could be until tomorrow." Josephine's teeth were chattering. The cold had seeped deep into her bones despite her wool clothes. Yates noticed and without a word pulled her against his side. The heat radiating from his large frame was incredible. She realized that beyond the warmth of his body, there was a solidity to him, a sense of absolute safety. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. "Cannot have you freezing to death after coming this far," he said, and she heard the hint of humor again. They sat pressed together while the storm battered the mountain. Yates talked to keep her mind off the cold, telling her about the wildlife in these ranges, the patterns of weather, the way the seasons turned. He had a deep, resonant voice that was pleasant to listen to, and Josephine found herself relaxing despite their circumstances. "You love it here," she observed. "The mountains. I can hear it when you talk about them." "I do," Yates admitted. "This is where I belong. Could not go back to living in cities, all those people crammed together, breathing the same air. This is where I can breathe." "It is beautiful," Josephine agreed. "Terrifying, but beautiful." "Most beautiful things are a little terrifying," Yates said thoughtfully. "That is what makes them worth seeing." The storm blew itself out by nightfall. They had lost hours of travel time, but they were alive and safe. Yates ventured out to check on the animals and came back dusted with snow. "We are fine," he reported. "Snow is already starting to pack down. We can make good time tomorrow." That night they slept in the cave, the fire burning low between them and the horses. Josephine was acutely aware of Yates's presence just a few feet away. He was snoring softly, the kind of deep sleep that came from physical exhaustion. She studied his face in the firelight, the strong jaw beneath the beard, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into harsh mountain sun. He was not handsome in the conventional sense. Too rugged, too rough around the edges, but there was something compelling about him. A quality of strength and competence that made her feel, for the first time in her adult life, that someone else was capable of shouldering the burden, that she did not have to be strong all the time. She fell asleep thinking about how his arm had felt around her shoulders, solid and warm. The third day was clear and bright, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. The snow from the previous day had transformed the landscape into something magical, every tree and rock frosted white. Their breath misted in the frigid air as they broke camp and continued up the trail. By early afternoon they crested a final ridge and Yates reined in his horse. "There," he said, pointing. "Home." Josephine looked down into a hidden valley. A stream ran through its center, frozen at the edges but still flowing in the middle. And beside the stream, nestled among the pines, stood a cabin. It was larger than she had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney. Smoke was not rising from it now, obviously, but she could imagine how it would look when someone was home, smoke curling into the sky, a warm glow in the windows. A corral stood near the cabin, currently empty. There was a small barn for the animals, a smokehouse, a root cellar built into the hillside. It was a complete homestead, isolated but self-sufficient. "You built all of this?" Josephine asked in wonder. "Over about 5 years," Yates confirmed. "Took a lot of work, but I wanted something that would last. Something solid." They descended into the valley as the sun began to sink toward the western peaks. By the time they reached the cabin, the light was golden, painting everything in warm tones. Yates dismounted and helped Josephine down, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Welcome," he said simply. He unlocked the cabin door and ushered her inside. The interior was dim until he opened the shutters on the windows. Light flooded in, revealing a single large room. There was a massive stone fireplace against one wall, a bed in one corner built into the wall like a ship's bunk, a rough-hewn table and chairs, shelves lined with books and supplies. A ladder led to a loft overhead. It was Spartan but clean, everything in its place, the cabin of a man who lived deliberately without excess. "Loft is for storage and extra furs," Yates said, already moving to build a fire in the fireplace. "You can have the bed. I will sleep on the floor or outside when the weather allows." "I cannot take your bed," Josephine protested. "You can and you will. Not up for debate." He gave her a look that brooked no argument. Within the hour, Yates had a roaring fire going, the horses and mules settled in the barn, and water heating for washing. Josephine explored the cabin, marveling at the little details. The way the logs fit together perfectly, no gaps for wind to creep through. The thickness of the door, built to withstand anything. The pelts on the floor, soft under her boots. "It is a good home," she said when Yates came back inside with an armload of firewood. "It serves," he replied, stacking the wood neatly by the hearth. "And it is yours as long as you need it. No conditions, no expectations. You are safe here, Josephine. I want you to know that." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "I believe you," she said. And she did. That night, Yates cooked a real meal. Venison from his stores, potatoes from the root cellar, even fresh biscuits he made from scratch. Josephine watched in amazement as this giant of a man moved around the kitchen area with surprising grace, clearly comfortable in this domestic sphere. "Who taught you to cook?" she asked. "Taught myself mostly. Had to learn or starve. Turns out I am decent at it." Decent was an understatement. The food was delicious, simple but hearty and flavorful. They ate at the table, the fire crackling warmth into the room. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and through the windows, Josephine could see stars appearing in vast numbers. "I have never seen so many stars," she breathed. "No city lights up here to drown them out," Yates said. "On a clear night, you can see the whole Milky Way." After dinner, Josephine helped him clean the dishes, heating water and washing while he dried. It felt strangely domestic, comfortable in a way her marriage to Thomas never had. With Thomas, there had always been tension, always the sense that she was walking on eggshells. With Yates, there was just peace. When the work was done, Yates pulled 2 chairs close to the fireplace. "Sit," he invited. "Tell me about yourself, where you come from, who you were before St. Elmo." So Josephine talked. She told him about growing up in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress, about her parents dying when she was 20, leaving her alone and vulnerable, about Thomas Harper sweeping in with his promises of security and adventure out west, about the slow realization that she had made a terrible mistake, but feeling trapped with no way out. Yates listened without judgment, without interruption. When she finished, her throat was tight with unshed tears. "You deserved better," he said quietly. "You deserve better." "I do not know what I deserve anymore," Josephine admitted. "I thought I knew what my life would be. Wife, mother, keeper of a home. But that life was built on a lie. Now I do not know who I am supposed to be." "Maybe you can be whoever you want," Yates suggested. "Out here, nobody cares about what you are supposed to be. You can just be yourself." The idea was revolutionary and terrifying. To simply exist without the weight of society's expectations. To choose her own path. "What if I do not know who that is?" she whispered. "Then you have time to figure it out," Yates said. "Winter will keep us snowed in for months. Plenty of time to think." The prospect of spending months alone with Yates in this cabin should have alarmed her. Instead, it felt like a gift. The days developed a rhythm. Josephine woke each morning to find Yates already up, coffee made and fire crackling. He would head out to tend the animals and check his trap lines, leaving her to manage the cabin. She learned to bake bread, to mend clothes, to keep the fire fed properly. Small tasks, but satisfying in their concrete results. When Yates returned in the afternoons, he would often bring fresh game. He taught her how to properly prepare a deer, how to smoke meat so it would last, how to tan hides. She had delicate hands and a weak stomach at first, but he was patient, showing her techniques and never mocking her inexperience. "You are learning fast," he observed one day as she successfully scraped a hide clean. "You have good instincts." The praise warmed her more than it should have. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Yates had an unexpectedly large collection of books, and he shared them freely. They read aloud to each other, sometimes Shakespeare, Dickens, even some philosophy. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Josephine found herself watching him when he was not looking. The way firelight played across his features, the easy strength in every movement, the gentle way he handled everything from horses to books. He was a contradiction in many ways, rough and refined, dangerous and kind, solitary yet generous with his time and knowledge, and she was developing feelings for him. She tried to deny it at first, tried to tell herself it was just gratitude or the isolation playing tricks on her mind. But her heart knew the truth. When he came in from outside, covered in snow and cold, her first instinct was to rush to him. When he smiled, which was rare but genuine, it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. When he said her name in that deep, careful voice, something in her chest tightened with longing. It was terrifying. She had been married only months ago, and that relationship had been a disaster. She had no business falling for another man so quickly, and yet her heart refused to listen to logic. The first serious snow came in early December. Josephine woke to find the world transformed, buried under 3 feet of white. Yates had to dig a path to the barn, his powerful shoulders and back making steady work of it. The valley was cut off now, truly isolated. No one could reach them until spring. They were entirely alone somehow. That felt right. Christmas approached, though neither of them had mentioned it. On December 24th, Josephine decided to do something special. While Yates was out checking the traps, she baked a cake using precious sugar and dried apples. It was lopsided and probably not very good, but it was her best effort. She also took one of her ribbons and tied it around the small music box her mother had given her. It was her only possession of real value, and she wanted Yates to have it. When he came in that evening, stamping snow from his boots, the cabin smelled of baked apples and cinnamon. He stopped, his nose twitching. "What is that smell?" "I made something. For Christmas." "I know it is not much, but I wanted to do something to thank you for everything." Yates looked genuinely touched. "You did not have to do that. I wanted to." They ate the cake by firelight, and Josephine was relieved when Yates proclaimed it delicious. Then she shyly handed him the wrapped music box. "This was my mother's," she said. "It is not much, but it means a great deal to me, and I want you to have it." Yates carefully unwrapped the ribbon and opened the small box. A delicate melody played, tinny but sweet. He stared at it for a long moment. "I cannot take this," he said finally, his voice rough. "It is too important. That is why I am giving it to you, because you are important. You saved my life, Yates. You gave me hope when I had none. You have been nothing but kind and patient and good. I do not have money to repay you, so I wanted to give you something that matters." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his ice-blue eyes had changed, warmed. "Thank you," he said softly. "I will treasure it." Then he reached behind him and pulled out a bundle wrapped in soft leather. "I made you something too." Josephine unwrapped it to find a pair of gloves, but these were not ordinary gloves. They were beautifully crafted from supple deerskin, lined with rabbit fur and decorated with intricate beadwork along the cuffs. "Yates, these are incredible," she breathed, slipping them on. "They fit perfectly, warm and soft. Wanted you to have something that was yours. Something nobody could take away or wager in a card game." There was fierce protectiveness in his voice. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. "They are perfect. Thank you." They sat close to the fire that night, closer than usual. Josephine's hand, clad in its new glove, somehow found its way to Yates's larger one. He did not pull away. They sat like that for hours, fingers intertwined, watching the flames dance. Neither of them spoke about what it meant. They did not need to. January was brutally cold. The temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes. Yates had been right about the trees sometimes in the deep night. They would hear sharp cracks like gunshots as sap froze and wood exploded. One night, a blizzard hit with such ferocity that even inside the cabin they could hear the wind shrieking like a mad thing. Josephine woke in the middle of the night, terrified by the sound. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. "It is all right," came Yates's voice from across the room. "Just wind. The cabin will hold." But she could not calm down. The fear was irrational but overwhelming. Before she could think better of it, she climbed out of bed and crossed to where Yates was bedded down on furs by the fire. "Can I stay here?" she asked, her voice small. "I am frightened." Yates did not hesitate. He lifted his blanket in invitation and Josephine slipped in beside him. His body was furnace hot, his presence solid and real in the chaos of the storm. He wrapped an arm around her, tucking her against his chest. "I have you," he murmured into her hair. "You are safe. I will not let anything happen to you." Josephine believed him. She relaxed into his embrace, her fear evaporating. This felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Being held by this strong, kind man while the world raged outside, being protected, being valued. She turned her face up to his in the firelight. "Yates?" "Yes, I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. She saw surprise flicker in his eyes, followed by something that looked like wonder. "You do not have to say that out of gratitude," he said carefully. "Or because you feel obligated." "I am not. I am saying it because it is true. I love you. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you see the world. I love that you read Shakespeare and make perfect biscuits. I love that you have shown me what a good man looks like." She took a shaky breath. "I know I am still married legally. I know this is complicated, but my heart does not care about any of that. My heart belongs to you." Yates was quiet for a long moment, and Josephine felt panic rising. Had she misjudged this? Was he about to tell her this was inappropriate, that she should go back to her own bed? Then he cupped her face with one large, calloused hand. "I have been in love with you since the moment you lifted your chin in that saloon and told Dutch Macready you were not property. I saw your courage and your fire, and I knew I would do anything to protect that, to protect you." Josephine's heart soared. "Truly, truly. But I did not say anything because I did not want to pressure you. You have been through hell with that worthless husband. I wanted you to have time to heal. To choose freely if you wanted anything more from me." "I am choosing," Josephine said fiercely. "I am choosing you, Yates Forrester, now and always." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the perfunctory kisses she had shared with Thomas. This was heat and passion and tenderness all wrapped together. His lips were gentle despite his strength, asking rather than demanding. Josephine melted into him, her hands coming up to tangle in his long hair. They broke apart, both breathing hard. The storm continued to rage outside, but in the cabin, everything was warmth and light. "Are you sure?" Yates asked, giving her one last chance to pull back. "Once we cross this line, there is no going back. I am not the kind of man who can share his heart casually. If you are mine completely." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel cherished, claimed in the best possible way. "I am sure," she whispered. "I am yours, Yates, completely." He kissed her again, deeper this time. His hands roamed her back, her hair, mapping her body with reverence. Josephine pressed closer, wanting to be nearer, to eliminate any space between them. What happened next was tender and fierce all at once. Yates loved her with the same focus he brought to everything else, completely, thoroughly, holding nothing back. He was gentle with her, mindful of his strength, but she could feel the leashed power in every touch. And when she urged him on, when she showed him she was not fragile, he gave her everything. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the firelight, her head on his broad chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I love you," he said again, as if he could not say it enough. "You are mine now. And I am yours. Nothing will change that." "Nothing," Josephine agreed, pressing a kiss over his heart. Outside, the storm began to ease. By morning, it would be calm again, but everything had changed. They had changed. February brought slightly warmer temperatures, though the snow still lay thick on the ground. Josephine and Yates existed in their own world, isolated and content. They worked side by side during the days, talked and read in the evenings, and held each other through the nights. Josephine had never been happier. This rough cabin in the middle of nowhere felt more like home than anywhere she had ever lived. And Yates, this gruff mountain man who was so gentle with her, felt like the other half of her soul. But reality had a way of intruding, even in paradise. In late February, during a brief warm spell that melted some of the snow, a rider appeared in the valley. Josephine saw him first, standing at the window while Yates was out in the barn. Her heart seized with sudden fear. Who would venture up here? Why? She called out to Yates, and he came running, his face growing grim when he spotted the rider. He stepped in front of Josephine protectively as the man approached. The rider was young, maybe 25, with a marshal's badge glinting on his chest. He looked frozen and exhausted. "Yates Forrester," he called out. "That is me. What brings a marshal to my valley?" The young man dismounted, his legs obviously stiff from the ride. "Name is Marshal Sam Walker. I am looking for a woman, Josephine Harper. Her husband reported her missing back in November. There are concerns that she might have been taken against her will." Josephine stepped forward before Yates could respond. "I am Josephine Harper, and I was not taken against my will. I chose to leave St. Elmo with Mr. Forrester." Marshal Walker looked relieved to see her alive and apparently well. "Madam, your husband is claiming you were kidnapped. He has filed a formal complaint. I need to investigate." "My husband," Josephine said coldly, "wagered me in a card game to pay his gambling debts. Mr. Forrester intervened and won me back. Then he offered me shelter because I had nowhere else to go." The marshal's eyebrows rose. "He wagered you, like property?" "Yes. Dutch McCready can confirm it if he is still in St. Elmo. So can several other men who were in the saloon that night." Walker rubbed his jaw, looking troubled. "That is a serious accusation, and technically illegal, though hard to prosecute. But you are saying you left voluntarily with Mr. Forrester, completely voluntarily. He has been nothing but respectful and kind. He saved my life." The marshal looked between them, taking in their obvious closeness. "I see. Well, I will need to report back that I found you safe and sound. But Mrs. Harper, you should know that your husband is demanding your return. Says you belong with him." "I belong to no one," Josephine said firmly. "And I will never return to Thomas Harper. She is under my protection," Yates added, his voice like granite. "Any man who tries to take her from here will have to go through me." Marshal Walker raised his hands placatingly. "I am not here to take anyone anywhere against their will. Just doing my job. But this is going to cause problems, Mrs. Harper. Your husband could make life difficult." "Let him try," Josephine said. "I want a divorce, on grounds of abandonment and gambling away marital assets." "That is between you and a judge," Walker said. "But I will include your statement in my report. Mr. Forrester, I hope you know what you are getting into. Thomas Harper might not let this go easily." "I know exactly what I am getting into," Yates replied, "and I am not afraid of Thomas Harper or any man like him." The marshal stayed just long enough to warm up and water his horse. Then he headed back down the mountain, promising to include everything they had told him in his official report. After he left, Josephine and Yates stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the trees. "This is not over," Josephine said quietly. "Thomas will not give up." "Then we will deal with whatever comes," Yates said, pulling her against his side. "Together, you are not facing anything alone anymore." Josephine leaned into his strength, drawing comfort from it, but worry gnawed at her. She knew Thomas, knew his petness and his spite. He would not let go of what he considered his property without a fight. March brought the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing brown grass and early wildflowers. The streams swelled with runoff, roaring through the valley, and the trails started to clear, which meant the outside world could reach them again. Yates made plans to go down to a smaller town called Granite about 20 miles away. "We need supplies," he explained. "And I want to talk to a lawyer about your situation. Get the divorce process started officially." "I will come with you," Josephine said. "It is a hard ride and there might be trouble." "Then I definitely should come with you. We are in this together, remember." Yates smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "Together," he agreed. They set out on a clear April morning, both on horseback. The trails were muddy but passable. Josephine was a much better rider now, comfortable in the saddle even on rough terrain. The months in the mountains had changed her physically too. She was leaner, stronger, her hands calloused from work. She looked like a woman who belonged to this wild place. Granite was even smaller than St. Elmo, barely more than a handful of buildings clustered around a mine entrance. But it had a general store, a telegraph office, and crucially, a lawyer who made the circuit through these mountain towns. They were in luck. Attorney James Hartley was in town for a few days, dealing with land disputes and contracts. Yates and Josephine met with him in a cramped office above the general store. Hartley was in his 50s, balding and bespectacled, but his eyes were sharp. He listened to Josephine's story without interruption, taking notes. "This is a fairly straightforward case," he said when she finished. "Your husband abandoned his responsibilities by gambling you away. That alone is grounds for divorce. The fact that you have been living separately for months helps, and if multiple witnesses can testify to what happened in that saloon, we have a strong case." "How long will it take?" Josephine asked. "A few months, probably. I will need to file the papers, your husband will be served, and then we wait for a judge to review the case. If Harper does not contest it, could be as fast as 3 months. If he fights it, longer." "He will fight it," Josephine said grimly. "He will do it just to be spiteful." "Then we prepare for a fight," Hartley said calmly. "But I am confident we will win. The law is on your side." They paid Hartley his retainer fee, $50 that Yates produced without hesitation, and left the office feeling slightly more hopeful. As they were loading supplies onto their horses, preparing to head back to the cabin, a commotion erupted down the street. Josephine turned to see Thomas Harper storming toward them, flanked by Dutch McCready and 2 other rough-looking men. Her stomach dropped. "There she is," Thomas shouted, pointing at her. "That is my wife. She was kidnapped." Yates stepped in front of Josephine immediately, his hand dropping to the knife at his belt. "Keep walking, Harper. You have no business here." Thomas looked worse than Josephine remembered. Thinner, hollow-eyed, his clothes dirty, desperation clung to him like a bad smell. "She is my wife. She belongs with me." "I belong to myself," Josephine said, stepping out from behind Yates despite his protective instincts. She would not cower. "And I am divorcing you, Thomas. I have already filed the papers." "You cannot do that," Thomas sputtered. "I am your husband. You stopped being my husband when you wagered me in a card game," Josephine shot back. "When you treated me like property to be traded, you disgust me." Dutch McCready stepped forward, his hand on his gun. "We have a problem here, Forrester. Harper says you stole his wife. That is a serious accusation. Mrs. Harper came with me voluntarily, Yates said calmly, though his body was coiled like a spring ready to release. Multiple witnesses can attest to that, including Marshall Walker, who visited last month. That is not how Harper tells it, Dutch said. Says you kidnapped her, forced her to go with you. That is a lie, Josephine said hotly. Thomas, you know it is a lie. You were there. You bet me and lost. Mr. Forrester saved me from being Dutch's property. I would have treated you well, Dutch said with an oily grin. Better than you deserve for abandoning your husband. Touch her and I will kill you, Yates said, and there was no bluster in the statement, just fact. A crowd was gathering, drawn by the confrontation. The local sheriff pushed through, a heavy-set man with a graying mustache. What is going on here? He demanded. Everyone started talking at once. The sheriff held up his hands. One at a time, you first, he said, pointing at Thomas. Thomas launched into his tale, painting himself as the wronged party and Yates as a villain who had stolen his wife. He made no mention of the card game or his gambling debts. When he finished, the sheriff looked at Josephine. Madam, what is your version? Josephine told the truth, clearly and concisely. She explained the card game, Yates's intervention, her choice to leave St. Elmo, and the months spent at Yates's cabin. She pulled out the paperwork from Attorney Hartley. I have filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment and mistreatment. This is legal and proper. The sheriff examined the papers, then looked at the crowd. Anyone here witnessed this card game? Billy, the young ranch hand from that night, stepped forward hesitantly. I was there, Sheriff. It happened like she said. Harper bet his wife when he ran out of money. Forrester won her back and burned the deck after. He burned the deck, the sheriff asked. Whole deck. Threw it in the stove, Billy confirmed. Said the game was over. Other men from St. Elmo who had been in the saloon that night corroborated the story. With each testimony, Thomas grew paler and Dutch angrier. The sheriff turned to Thomas with obvious disgust. Mr. Harper, from what I am hearing, you have no grounds to claim kidnapping. Your wife left voluntarily after you committed what amounts to unlawful trafficking. You are lucky I do not arrest you. But she is my wife, Thomas protested weakly. Not for long, apparently, the sheriff said. Now I suggest you leave this lady alone before you find yourself in real trouble. I am not leaving without her, Thomas said stubbornly. She belongs to me. That was when Dutch made his move. Apparently deciding to take what he thought he was owed, he lunged for Josephine, his hand closing around her wrist. It was a mistake. Yates moved faster than Josephine would have thought possible for a man his size. His fist connected with Dutch's jaw with a sound like a hammer hitting meat. Dutch went down hard, blood spraying from his split lip. The two men with Dutch and Thomas reached for their guns, but Yates already had his knife out, the blade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Do not, he said softly. I promise you will lose. The men froze. They could see death in Yates's eyes, could see that he was not bluffing. The sheriff drew his own weapon. Nobody is shooting anybody, he announced. McCready, get up and get out of my town. Harper, same goes for you. You too, he gestured at Dutch's companions. Take these fools and leave. If I see any of you causing trouble again, you will spend a month in my jail. Dutch struggled to his feet, spitting blood. This is not over, Forrester. Yes, it is, Yates said coldly. Josephine is under my protection. She is going to be my wife as soon as the law allows. If you or Harper or anyone else comes near her again, I will not be as gentle as I was today. Do you understand me? Dutch looked at Yates's implacable expression, and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. He nodded once, then limped away with his men. Thomas lingered, looking at Josephine with something that might have been regret. Josie, please, I am sorry. I know I made mistakes, but we can start over." "No, Thomas, we cannot. You broke something that can never be fixed. I do not love you." "I am not sure I ever did. But I know I love Yates, and I am going to build a life with him. Please, for once in your life, do the right thing and let me go." Thomas's shoulders slumped. Whatever fight he had left drained out of him. He nodded slowly and walked away without another word. Josephine watched him go and felt nothing but relief. The sheriff holstered his gun. "You folks should get out of town before anything else happens. And Forrester, keep her safe. I have a feeling she is worth it." "I know she is," Yates said, taking Josephine's hand. They rode out of Granite as the sun began to set, heading back toward the mountains and home. Josephine felt lighter than she had in months. The confrontation was over. Thomas had backed down. The divorce was in motion. Her future was finally her own to shape. "You said I was going to be your wife," she said as they rode through the twilight. Yates glanced at her, and she could see color rise in his cheeks beneath his beard. "I did. Should have asked first, I suppose, but it came out in the heat of the moment." "Ask me now," Josephine said. Yates reined in his horse, and Josephine stopped Dove beside him. He turned to face her fully, his ice-blue eyes serious and tender all at once. "Josephine Harper, will you marry me? I do not have much to offer except a cabin in the mountains, a hard life, and a heart that belongs completely to you. But if you will have me, I promise to love you and protect you and cherish you every day for the rest of my life." Tears pricked Josephine's eyes. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Yates Forrester. I cannot imagine anything I want more." He leaned across the space between their horses and kissed her, gentle and sweet. When they broke apart, both were grinning like fools. They rode home under emerging stars, planning their future together. Summer in the high country was brief but glorious. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in waves of purple and yellow. The air was warm but never hot, perfect for working outside. Josephine helped Yates tend his garden. They had planted vegetables that would mature in the short growing season and learned to fish in the stream. In June, word came via a rider that the divorce had been granted. Thomas had not contested it after all, perhaps finally understanding that he had lost. Josephine was free. They married a week later in a small ceremony in Granite. Attorney Hartley served as witness along with Billy and his sweetheart. It was simple and quick, just an exchange of vows and rings that Yates had crafted himself from silver. But it meant everything. "I love you, Mrs. Forrester," Yates said as they left the makeshift chapel. "I love you too, Mr. Forrester," Josephine replied, her heart full to bursting. They spent their wedding night back at the cabin, in the bed that was now legally and morally theirs to share. Yates loved her with the passion and tenderness she had come to expect from him, and Josephine gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Life settled into a new rhythm. Josephine was no longer just a guest in the cabin, but a full partner in making their life work. She learned to shoot, to track, to read the weather. Yates taught her everything he knew about surviving in the mountains, and she proved to be an eager and capable student. In the fall, they made the trip down to Granite again for supplies. This time, Josephine walked through town with her head high, Yates's ring on her finger and his name attached to hers. No one bothered them. No one dared. Winter came again, their second together. But this time Josephine was not afraid of the isolation. She welcomed it. The long evenings by the fire, the mornings waking in Yates's arms, the quiet contentment of a life built on mutual respect and love. In February, Josephine realized she was pregnant. She was terrified to tell Yates, worried about how he would react. But when she finally gathered the courage to share the news, his face lit up with such joy that her fears evaporated. "A baby," he breathed, placing his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Josephine asked. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Yates said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a wife, now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." Their daughter was born in October of 1879, after a long labor that terrified Yates far more than it did Josephine. She was perfect, tiny and pink, with a shock of dark hair and her father's blue eyes. They named her Hope because that was what she represented: a new beginning, a future full of possibility. Yates was a devoted father. Josephine would often find him just staring at Hope in wonder, as if he could not believe this tiny person existed. He was gentle with her despite his size, his large hands carefully cradling her small body. He sang to her in his deep voice silly songs that made Josephine laugh. As Hope grew from infant to toddler, the cabin rang with laughter for the first time in its existence. She was a happy child, fearless and curious like her father, with her mother's sharp mind. She learned to walk by pulling herself up on Yates's legs, using him like a living tree. 2 years later, their son was born. They named him Samuel, after Yates's grandfather. He was quieter than Hope, but just as loved, with his mother's dark hair and a serious expression that made him look wise beyond his years. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family. Yates built additions: a proper second bedroom, a larger kitchen area, a covered porch where they could sit on summer evenings and watch the children play. What had once been a bachelor's rough shelter became a real home, filled with warmth and love and the chaos of family life. Josephine sometimes thought about how different her life could have been if Yates had not walked into that saloon, if he had not cared enough to intervene, if he had not offered her shelter and safety and, eventually, love. She had been won in a card game like property, treated as something to be owned and traded. But Yates had won her back and burned the deck, symbolically destroying the idea that she could ever be property again. He had given her freedom. And then, when she was ready, she had freely chosen to give her heart to him. One evening, when Hope was 5 and Samuel 3, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. Hope was chattering about a fox she had seen that day, and Samuel was playing quietly with carved wooden animals Yates had made for him. Josephine leaned against her husband's broad shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically. "Happy?" he asked, as he often did. "Perfectly," Josephine replied. "Are you?" Yates looked at their children, at the cabin he had built that was now a home, at the woman he loved beyond reason. "More than I ever dreamed possible," he said quietly. "You saved me, you know. I did not realize how alone I was until you were here. How empty this place was. You filled it with life and light and love." "We saved each other," Josephine corrected. "You gave me freedom and showed me what love should really look like. You taught me I was strong enough to build the life I wanted." "We built it together," Yates said, kissing the top of her head. Hope climbed into her father's lap, demanding a story about bears. Samuel abandoned his toys to snuggle against his mother's side. Yates began to spin a tale, his deep voice weaving magic in the twilight. Josephine listened with one ear while mostly just soaking in the moment, her family, together and safe and happy. The mountains rose around them, eternal and indifferent. But within the cabin's walls, love bloomed and thrived. A love that had been forged in the most unlikely circumstances, tempered by hardship, and proven through devotion. Years passed. Hope and Samuel grew strong and capable, learning the ways of the mountains from their father and the ways of books and thinking from their mother. They were wild children in the best sense, free and fearless, comfortable in the wilderness but also educated and thoughtful. When Hope was 12, she asked her mother how she and Yates had met. Josephine hesitated, unsure how to explain the darkness that had led to their light. But she decided her daughter deserved the truth. She told the story of St. Elmo, of Thomas's betrayal, of Yates walking through those saloon doors like an answer to a prayer she had not known to speak. She told about the card game and the burned deck, about the 3-day journey through the mountains, about falling in love in a cabin while snow fell outside. Hope listened with wide eyes. When Josephine finished, her daughter was quiet for a long moment. "Papa is a hero," she finally said. "He is," Josephine agreed. "But I am the hero of my own story too. I chose to leave St. Elmo, I chose your father, I chose this life. Never forget that you always have choices, Hope. No matter what happens, you have choices." "I will remember, Mama," Hope promised. Samuel, who had been listening from his corner, spoke up. "Did you really burn a whole deck of cards?" Yates, who had been working on tanning a hide in the corner, looked up with a grin. "I did. Best fire I ever started." The children giggled, and Josephine felt her heart swell with love for this beautiful family they had created from nothing. More years turned. Hope grew into a strong, independent young woman who could track a deer for miles and also quote Shakespeare from memory. Samuel became a skilled craftsman like his father, his hands creating beautiful things from wood and metal. Both children were well prepared for whatever lives they chose to build. When Hope was 18, a young trapper came through asking permission to court her. Yates, protective father that he was, gave the young man such a thorough interrogation that Hope was mortified. But eventually he gave his blessing. The young man, whose name was Michael, was respectful and hardworking. He clearly adored Hope. They married when Hope was 20, and Josephine cried at her daughter's wedding, remembering her own simple ceremony years before. Yates held her hand through the whole thing, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Samuel showed no signs of settling down, happy to work with his father and explore the mountains. "I will find someone when the time is right," he assured his mother. "Like you and Papa did." When Josephine was 45 and Yates 48, they became grandparents. Hope and Michael had a son, a squalling, red-faced baby they named Yates after his grandfather. The first time Yates held his namesake, Josephine saw tears actually fall down his bearded cheeks. "I never thought I would have this," he whispered to her that night as they lay in bed. "Never imagined I could be this happy. How did I get so lucky?" "We made our own luck," Josephine replied. "By choosing each other every day, by building something real and lasting." "I would choose you again," Yates said fiercely. 1,000 times over, you are the best decision I ever made." "And you are mine," Josephine said, kissing him. Even after all these years, his kiss still made her heart race. Their life was not always easy. There were hard winters when food ran low and they worried about making it through. There were injuries and illnesses that frightened them. Samuel broke his leg badly one winter, and it took months to heal properly. Hope lost a baby between her first and second children, and they all grieved together. But through everything, Josephine and Yates faced it together. Their love had been tested by time and hardship, and had only grown stronger. They were partners in the truest sense, equals who balanced each other perfectly. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Josephine by taking her back down to Granite. The town had grown some, a few more buildings, a proper church now, but it was still small, still rough around the edges. Yates led her to the general store, which was now run by Billy, that young ranch hand who had testified for them all those years ago. He greeted them warmly, and his own wife brought out tea. "I wanted to bring you back here," Yates explained to Josephine, "because this is where it all came together, where we stood up to Harper and McCready, where we decided to build our life together." "It is a good memory," Josephine agreed. "I have something for you," Yates said, pulling a small box from his pocket. 20 years is a long time. Wanted to mark it proper. Inside the box was a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a pendant shaped like a mountain peak. It was beautiful and simple and perfect. "Yates, it is gorgeous," Josephine breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "You are the mountain that anchors me," he said quietly. "Strong and beautiful and eternal. I wanted you to have something that shows it." Josephine kissed him, not caring that they were in public. After 20 years, she was not shy about showing her love for this remarkable man. They had lunch at the small restaurant, walked through town hand in hand, and then rode back to their mountain cabin as the sun set. It was a perfect day, made more perfect by the fact that it was just one of thousands they had shared and would continue to share. When Josephine was 50, she noticed Yates moving a bit slower than he used to. His hair was fully gray now, his beard shot through with silver. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "We are getting old," she observed one evening. "We are getting old together," Yates corrected. "That is all that matters." Samuel married when he was 28 to a woman named Clara who was a teacher from Granite. They settled nearby, building their own cabin about 5 miles from Yates and Josephine's. Hope and Michael had 4 children by then, keeping Josephine busy with grandmotherly duties whenever they visited. The cabin that had once held just Yates, alone and isolated, was now the center of a sprawling family. Grandchildren ran through the rooms that Josephine had once cleaned nervously, not knowing if she would be welcome for more than a winter. The walls echoed with laughter and life. One night, when Josephine was 55 and Yates 58, they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside. It sounded like that night, so long ago, when she had climbed into his bedroll seeking comfort and admitted she was falling in love with him. "Do you remember that blizzard?" Josephine asked. "When I told you I loved you for the first time?" "I remember," Yates said, his arm tightening around her. "I remember everything about loving you. It has been a good life," Josephine said softly. "Better than I ever imagined possible when I was standing in that saloon, watching my husband wager me away. I thought my life was over, but it was actually just beginning." "Our life," Yates emphasized. "Not just yours, mine too. I was barely living before you arrived, just existing. You taught me what it meant to really live, to love, to be part of something bigger than myself." They held each other in the darkness, 2 people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something extraordinary from the ruins of Josephine's first marriage. Yates died peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 61. He had been out checking trap lines that day, had come home and eaten dinner, had told Josephine he loved her, and had simply not woken up the next morning. Josephine's grief was profound but not bitter. They had been blessed with 25 years of marriage, had raised 2 children and seen them settled and happy, had welcomed grandchildren and even 1 great-grandchild. They had loved each other deeply and completely. She could not ask for more than that. She stayed in the cabin, refusing to move in with either of her children despite their offers. This was her home. This was where she had found herself, where she had loved Yates, where they had built their life together. She would not abandon it. Samuel and Clara visited often, as did Hope and her family. Josephine was never truly alone, but she missed Yates with an ache that never quite faded. She would catch herself turning to tell him something, only to remember he was gone. She would wake in the night and reach for him, finding only cold sheets, but she also felt him everywhere. In the sturdy walls he had built, in the furniture he had crafted with his own hands, in their children's faces and their grandchildren's laughter. He lived on in everything they had created together, On what would have been their 30th wedding anniversary, Josephine sat on the porch at sunset, looking at the mountains. She wore the necklace Yates had given her for their 20th anniversary, and his ring was still on her finger. The wind rustled through the pines, and for just a moment she could almost feel his presence beside her. "I miss you," she whispered to the evening air. "But thank you. Thank you for walking into that saloon. Thank you for burning that deck of cards. Thank you for giving me a life worth living." "I love you, Yates Forrester. I will love you until the day I die." The mountains stood eternal around her, silent witnesses to a love story that had begun in darkness and bloomed into light. A story of a woman won in a card game like property, and a mountain man who won her back and burned the deck, symbolically declaring that she would never be property again. And in that act of destruction, burning 52 pieces of pasteboard, Yates had created something far more valuable. He had given Josephine her freedom, and she, in turn, had freely given him her heart. It was a trade that had enriched them both beyond measure, a love that had lasted through decades and would continue to echo through their descendants for generations to come. When Josephine was 68, she passed away peacefully, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was buried beside Yates on a hillside overlooking the valley they had both loved. The marker was simple, just their names and dates, but it did not need to say more. Their great-granddaughter, another Hope, would later say that she could feel the love radiating from that spot. That something about standing there made her believe in true love, in second chances, in the idea that the right person could change everything. And she was right. Because the story of Josephine and Yates was not just about two people who found each other. It was about courage and choice, about refusing to be defined by others' failures, about building something beautiful from broken pieces, about love that was chosen freely and given completely. It was about a deck of cards burned to ash, and a future built from those ashes that was more glorious than either of them could have imagined. And it was proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to the best ones. That rock bottom can be the foundation on which we build something extraordinary. That love, when it is real and true, can transform everything. The cabin still stands in that hidden valley, maintained by descendants who understand its significance. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right, visitors swear they can hear the echo of laughter, the murmur of voices, the sense of a love so strong it imprinted itself on the very mountains. The story of Yates and Josephine Forrester became legend in those parts. The mountain man who won a woman in a card game and then burned the deck. The woman who was treated as property and reclaimed her freedom. The love that grew from the most unlikely beginning and lasted beyond death itself. It was a story worth telling, a love worth remembering. And in the end, that is all any of us can hope for. To love and be loved in return. To build something that lasts. To leave the world a little better than we found it. Yates and Josephine Forrester did all of that and more. Their love was the kind that changes everything. The kind that echoes through time. The kind that reminds us all what is possible when we choose courage over fear, love over loneliness, hope over despair. They were two broken people who found each other in the middle of nowhere and built paradise. And their story would live on forever, whispered by the wind through the high mountain pines, carved into the very rocks of the Colorado Rockies, written in the stars that blazed overhead on those crystal-clear nights. A testament to love's power, to second chances, to the idea that it is never too late to start over, to begin again, to choose differently, to choose love.